people who want to. All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here online and in person. We're very excited to have some presentations and discussion on how we can unite our struggles against the imperialist war machine. And yes, this is Cody. Can you can you go to the next slide? Or I'm just gonna read.
Next one.
No, this is good.
Right.
Yeah. So too many. Yes. Welcome. Getting this text still set up. Hybrid meetings are a challenge, but we wanted to make sure that this was accessible to more people across Germany and Europe, because this is we'll be discussing a campaign that is truly international, but also its ramifications here in Germany. So Oz, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, so my name is Mary. I'm here representing the International League of People Struggles, Germany. And this event is in collaboration with ILPS Germany, ALPAS Pilipinas, and the RESIST NATO Campaign. ILPS is the International League of People Struggles, the largest militant global openly anti-imperialist alliance in the world. ALPAS is a Berlin-based organization of Filipinos and allies fighting for the rights and welfare of Filipino migrants here in Berlin. But it's also primarily a part of the struggle for genuine democracy and liberation in the Philippines. And the Resist NATO campaign, we're going to talk a lot more about. So I'll save that for that. Yeah, if you're online, I invite you to share in the chat now, like what brought you here to this meeting, and here in person to take a minute to turn to your neighbor to say hi and introduce yourself to someone you don't know. Um, sorry, I was getting the room in order. There was a lively conversation, and I want to also share a few things from the chat. We have people joining in from Finland, recent NATO member, so very important to link up with the anti-NATO forces internationally. Kathy from ALPAS and Gabriella is here to connect organizations and individuals in Germany and beyond on how to strengthen the campaign against NATO, particularly mobilizing for the anti-NATO summit in June. And then similarly, Jazz also from Berlin to learn more. And we've got Tasha from Seattle and Mog from ILPS in Portland, Oregon. And yeah, and oh, then also some folks from Brooklyn and Oz is in Cyprus. So I think some of Amy's comrades. And then a member of the Resist NATO steering committee and from Italy, Alessandra. So yeah, welcome everybody. Yeah, like I said, very glad to have you here. We'll just to go over our agenda. Oz, could you go to the next slide? We'll have three relatively short inputs from our guests. Then we'll have some small breakout discussions to discuss what we have learned and how it relates to us and our organizing. And so first we'll hear about US militarization broadly across the world and specifically how it affects the Filipino people through the example of the Balkatan exercises. And then we're going to hear from Oz Karahan about NATO and militarization in Europe. And then we'll hear from Tess about Germany's role in rising militarization here. And then we'll come back together to learn more concretely about the Resist NATO campaign and discuss how we can link and unite our local organizing to the international efforts. And yeah, close with discussion, Q&A, and in-person mingling. Okay, so with that, I will hand it to Amy. Amy, you can introduce yourself. Yeah, okay, great.
Shall we get on the next slide? Hi, so my name is Amy. I'm actually from New York City, and I'm a member of NYCHIRP, which stands for New York Committee for Human Rights in the Philippines. We are a volunteer-led organization which educates, organizes, and mobilizes to uphold and support human rights in the Philippines. And I'm visiting Berlin, and I just so happened to have sort of co-presented this presentation at our campaign launch in March which was to stop US war crimes in the Philippines. And for those of you who do not yet know what the Balikatan War Games are, I will clarify this a bit further into our presentation. Next slide. So today I wanted to help provide a deeper understanding for why we are focusing our campaign against US militarism in the Philippines. In this presentation, we'll look briefly at the history of US-Philippine relations, the economic motivations behind all of it, and its ongoing effects and impacts on the Filipino people. Next slide. Brief history of the Philippines. So the Philippines is an archipelago made up of about 7,000 islands that is located southeast of China and Vietnam and south of Japan. The three major island groups are Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. There are over 100,000 million people in the Philippines, making it the 12th most populous country. It is rich in natural resources, including gold, nickel, copper, timber, oil, rice, bananas, fish, and many more. Although it has experienced hundreds of years of colonization dating back to the 1500s, when Spain first arrived, it has a long history of struggle against oppression, dating back to the first colonial encounter when Lapu-Lapu defeated Ferdinand Magellan and his Spanish forces. I'm actually not seeing the slides here.
Oh, here.
Do you mind?
Sorry.
How do we retoggle it?
Uh-huh.
Ooh, okay.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay.
This is better.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, going on. Next slide. Oh wait, it hasn't changed. Oh, okay, I have to change it. Okay. Thank you. I'm a little bit of a tech dummy. Yeah, I'll also start with a very compact history of US-Philippine military relations. In 1898, shortly after the Philippine Revolution of 1896 and the Spanish-American War of 1898, a defeated Spain sold the Philippines to the US, along with Puerto Rico, Cuba, and Guam. This was seen as a betrayal and indignity by the Filipino people who fought the Americans in a brutal guerrilla war, which lasted until the Filipino people's defeat in 1902. The US subsequently continued to develop the Philippines as a plantation colony, with incremental stages establishing so-called democratic privileges until a so-called full independence was granted in 1946. In other words, over these years, the US cultivated a puppet government serving their own interests. What is called independence is more of a semi-colonial relationship. So this is particularly clear in the Mutual Defense Treaty of 1951, a Cold War era agreement of mutual defense, in which the US instrumentalized the location and resources of the Philippines in order to suppress the spread of communism in Asia. This treaty set the precedent for all subsequent unequal military agreements between the two countries and leading up to our present, where we see a ramping up of US military activity in the country with 4 new bases added since 2023. So if you notice these red dots on this map of the Philippines, they represent the location of the new military bases, and you can see there's a cluster of 3 in the north, which directly face China and Taiwan. Next slide. So Cavite Yard, the photo you see on the left, was a key naval base for US wars of aggression in the region, including significantly the Vietnam War. In 1992, the Philippine Senate voted against keeping US bases. This was due in large part to a successful people's campaign against US military bases in the country. Unfortunately, a few years later, the government backtracked on this agenda and continued to serve US interests, signing into law the Visiting Forces Agreement of 1999, which authorized the permanent stay of American soldiers in the Philippines under the cover of nonstop, quote, joint military exercises, end quote, and the rotation of military troops. Next slide. Added to this was the Enhanced Defense and Cooperation Agreement, EDCA for short, of 2014, which brought back the US bases that were previously closed. So EDCA was part of the American-Philippine Alliance, allowing US troops to stay in the Philippines to build and operate facilities on bases in the Philippines, essentially allowing the reestablish of US military bases. These 4 new bases, which I mentioned before, were, sorry, were established, essentially bringing, the Philippines closer into the crossfires of the US's campaign against China. And I also wanted to really highlight that in the first week after Trump's inauguration, high-level officials from both governments met in quick succession to further cement the unequal military relationship under the new administration. And yeah, to give a little background, there was actually already a sort of agreement of like maybe $500 million of military aid from the US to the Philippines, like on the table. And even though Trump ended up freezing most foreign aid and has been slashing funding and jobs in health, education, environment, culture, and other social welfare sectors, he actually exempted from this $500 million deal $336 million sort of earmarked, especially for the Philippines. And then this gets even crazier. On April 1st, a military aircraft and weapons sale to the Philippines totaling $5.58 billion was approved by the US State Department, followed a few weeks later by $120 million approved sale of helicopters and other sort of weapons control systems. So this isn't even aid. These are sales. How can the Philippines even afford this price tag? The Philippine ambassador to the US, Jose Manuel Romualdez, said that these weapons deals could be partly supported by a loan between Manila and Washington. This, it will just obviously drag the Philippines even further into an indebted relationship with their neo-colonial oppressor, the US, and be a massive diversion of funds which are better spent on the Filipino people suffering economic crisis. And just to mention, ICHIRP US currently has a campaign to block these arms sales to the Philippines. Next slide. So going into Balikatan. So Balikatan means shoulder to shoulder in Filipino, and they were military exercises which were reinstated in 2000 after the Visiting Forces Agreement was signed in order to continue US military presence. In 2000, state forces claimed it was necessary to conduct Balikatan and other exercises to secure the South China Sea and to fight communist guerrillas to maintain peace for trade opportunities in the region. Starting in 2022, Balikatan exercises keep increasing in scale, with 16,000 troops participating in 2024's exercises. The 2025 version just ended. It took place from April 21st to May 9th and was the biggest exercises yet, with over 17,000 troops, including forces from Japan and Australia, and expanding from just counterinsurgency simulations to a full battle test. I'm not sure if the full battle test actually managed to go through in this round, but that was the plan. And many NATO countries were present as sort of military observers, including Germany, the Czech Republic, Lithuania, Poland, and the Netherlands, which was new this year, as well as Canada, France, and the UK. A few other fun facts. The Balikatan established several really scary sounding new missile systems. One is called Typhon and one is called Nemesis, which basically creates this comprehensive long and short range strike network with a maximum range of 1,800 kilometers, which can basically cover China's southeastern coastal areas, the Taiwan Straits, the Bashi Channel, and the northern South China Sea. And another really interesting fact, though he didn't provide specific details, the Balikatan director, Major General Francisco Lorenzo Jr., warned against, quote, cyber warfare, information warfare, cognitive warfare, and political warfare by China and its alleged proxies. Accordingly, cybersecurity was a chief focus of this year's Balikatan exercise opening days. And earlier this month, a top Philippine general alleged that, quote, communist China is already conducting united front works in our country. End quote. The armed forces of the Philippines chief Romeo Bronner went so far as to claim that China is, quote, already infiltrating our institutions, our schools, our businesses, our churches, even our ranks in the military, end quote. So yeah, these escalations really reveal how the US is converting the Philippines into a battleground for its imperial war against China with very little, or actually I would just say no consideration to the sovereignty of the Philippines or the impacts of on the Filipino people. So next slide. So even as Balikatan sort of toned down the local counterinsurgency this year and sort of pivoted to the external threat of China, US military presence continues to support counterinsurgency operations targeting the Philippine People's Movement. These programs are a continuation from colonial times and seek to destroy a strong and well-organized people's independence movement fighting for real solutions. It's okay. Fighting for real solutions such as genuine land reform, industrialization, and other developments that would lead to the Philippines actually becoming sovereign and democratic. This resistance is this single biggest threat to US military control. American counterinsurgency tactics, such as prisoner torture and civilian surveillance, were historically innovated and trialed in the Philippines during the Philippine-American War and in the American colonial period. This both established a basis for rampant human rights abuses in the present, as well as drawing direct lineages to Homeland Security, Abu Ghraib torture, and other domestic state abuses in the US. And yeah, this graphic is kind of intense. Like essentially it's, yeah, it shows that Marcos's presidency thus far has overseen 119 at least 119 extrajudicial killings, almost 47,000 indiscriminate bombings, and more than 3.7 million cases of threats, harassment, and intimidation. But even with these clear abuses of human rights happening before our eyes, the Philippines remains the top recipient of US military aid in Southeast Asia. Next slide. So here I also think it's important to assert that the Philippines is in the midst of a civil war that has been going on for more than 50 years, and which is a conflict between, on the one hand, the Communist Party of the Philippines, the New People's Army, and the National Democratic Front of the Philippines, the NDFP for short, and on the other hand, the Republic of the Government of the Philippines. So the endurance of this protracted people's war reflects the persistence of the basic problems of Philippine society, which keeps the country underdeveloped, exploited by foreign interests and its own ruling class, and its people impoverished. At the same time, the NDFP, the National Democratic Front of the Philippines, which is the diplomatic arm of the People's Movement, has tried for decades to engage in peace talks to solve the root causes of the armed conflict in the Philippines. And in the words of the revolutionary leader and chairperson of the negotiating panel for the NDFP, Julie de Lima, quote, "The NDFP is a national liberation movement that truly respects human rights and international human law. The NDFP will always defend and fight for the rights of the exploited, toiling Filipino masses in their struggle for national and social liberation, and will seek justice everywhere and anywhere. The NDFP and the Filipino people continue to fight a just war in a just way." End quote. In other words, the NDFP plays by the international rules of war, but the Philippine government does not. Marcos Jr.'s insincere claim to pursuing peace talks is evidenced by the fact that his government continues to imprison and murder the NDFP's peace consultants. Next slide. And in fact, the Philippine government has, in the past 10 years, institutionalized new policies whose sole purpose is to delegitimize and destroy the people's movement in the Philippines. In 2018, Duterte inaugurated the whole of nation approach, which established a national task force to end local communist armed conflict. In this diagram, you can see that under Duterte's executive order, he's at the head of NTF-ELCAC, followed by Lieutenant General Ernesto C. Torres, and under that are the icons of the 12 institutional clusters which govern a range of civic categories, from employment to education, agriculture, and resource management. This is I can't even describe, this is a very dangerous structure because it essentially makes all these institutions of governance available to unchecked counterintelligence operations. This has resulted in a deep infiltration of left-leaning NGOs, schools, government, local government offices, community pantries, farming cooperatives, and many, many more organizations and individuals. These groups and individuals become red tagged, meaning they are publicly accused of being communist terrorists, which often leaves them and their communities and families vulnerable to violent threats and extrajudicial killings. And recently, actually, a local activist in an island called Negros Occidental, or an island called Negros in the Philippines, explained to me that NTF-ELCAC kind of works like if someone, for example, a farmer who's disputing an illegal land grab gets accused of being part of the communist movement, her whole family could be cut off from basic social services because of the power of NTF-ELCAC. And so for peasant or worker families, this threat poses like so much, yeah, danger to like their very survival. It's yeah, it's crazy. So our current president, Marcos, took the whole of nation approach even further by establishing a national security policy which brings these government agencies even more tightly into the sphere of national security, allowing military influence to keep expanding without limits. And as I mentioned earlier, hundreds of extrajudicial killings, kidnaps, false arrests, and cases of threats and harassment have happened as a result of these policies. Am I going over time?
A little bit, I think.
Okay. I was reviewing the slides and it was, there still are quite a few. Is that okay? Next slide. I'll just go through. I'll try to be quick. Somehow I feel like this is really important material to share, especially with people who are less familiar to the Philippines context. So I'm just gonna follow along with these nods I'm getting. Thank you. So yeah, in the next set of slides, I feel like I've shared a little bit of the what, but I want to talk a little bit of the why. Obviously, there's a goal to contain China's economic power, but it's also economic incentives to foreign interests within the Philippines that pushes forward both the traditional and counterinsurgent military plans. So this military presence is aiding corporations and foreign investors that are actively stealing resources from the country and committing labor rights violations. In addition to the unequal military agreements, there are also unequal economic agreements, such as for foreign mining and nuclear power. The US imperialists work alongside the wealthy class in the Philippines to keep the large majority of its people poor, especially the workers and farmers. It's why the Philippines is a semi-colonial and semi-feudal society. It keeps the Filipinos in debt, reliant on imports, and it keeps the economy reliant on exporting whatever it produces rather than producing what will benefit the actual toiling masses. So when we talk about imperialism and who the imperialists are, we mean the 1% and the capitalists that are the heads of these corporations. They extract the most profit and benefit from the resource plundering and labor exploitation. Because capitalism requires perpetual growth, the capitalists are perpetually trying to expand to foreign markets to develop a monopoly over their respective industry. So in this image, you can see this sort of island chain defense strategy that the US developed in the 1950s, actually, and re-implemented with the rise of China. It seeks to use the Philippines, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan to control the waterways and natural resources in the ocean for itself. It is not only the increase in military bases in the Philippines that is used as part of this strategy, but also an increase in arms storage seen through such deals as the 123 nuclear deal, which transfers nuclear equipment and material to the Philippines, as well as building more fuel storage stations for military purposes, such as that completed in Cebu of this year. So by controlling the region militarily, the US paves the way for corporations to take what they want from the land and the people. Next slide. Natural resource extraction. So as explained in the beginning of this presentation, the Philippines is a land rich in natural resources, not just in the archipelago, but also in the water that surrounds it. The South China Sea is thought to have roughly 11 billion barrels of oil and 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. On March 5th, as part of an envoy to DC, the Philippine ambassador invited US companies to invest in this natural resource exploration. This move, as he stated, was being done in a calculated way to lower the cost of energy and fuel, not for the Filipino people, but as a means to attract the investors. And open face mining is also increasing after a 9-year moratorium was lifted by President Duterte and recently championed by President Marcos, trying to reposition the country as a leading exporter of transition materials, as the demand for green energy technology increases. So nickel and copper are the sort of major transition materials needed for batteries and also are found in an abundance in the Philippines. Next slide. Oh, wait. Oh, wait, that was a double. Okay, no worries. So the U.S. interest in the Philippines is not only for the mineral wealth that can be extracted from the land, but also for the exports it can produce and the cheap labor costs. The neoliberal policies enacted during the Marcos dictatorship and continued today through his son, Marcos Jr., allow foreign corporations to set up shop in the Philippines, relying on the country's skilled but cheap labor to assemble and package final products without developing their own industrial capacity. So business process outsourcing is an industry in the Philippines, which remains one of the largest areas of employment for Filipinos in the country, even though the contractualization of this labor keeps wages and benefits incredibly low.
I think we have to move to the next slide as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think go to the next slide.
Yes, thanks.
Yeah, there we go.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So through the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, a trade deal with 14 countries, including the Philippines and the US, the IPEF seeks to stabilize and strengthen US supply chains to ensure profitability of its investments. This critical supply chain the critical supply chains identified include semiconductors, clean energy, and agribusiness. Again, securing the region from China's encroachment should be seen for what it is: a move to keep the Philippines accessible for the benefit of transnational corporations and not for the Filipino people. Next slide. So, U.S. military aid is funding war crimes. As of now, we know the history of U.S. military presence and what its interests are, but let's really clarify now what the U.S. is really doing, and that is funding war crimes. In 2024, the International People's Tribunal convened and found current President Marcos Jr., former President Duterte, and then President Joseph Biden guilty of war crimes or violations of international humanitarian law. Some of the findings from the recent International People's Tribunal last year include the murder of civilians, intentionally directing attacks against civilians and civilian objects, using indiscriminate means and methods of warfare, forcibly displacing civilian populations as a result of military operations, impeding humanitarian aid intended for civilians, arbitrary arrest and detention, and red tagging, terrorist labeling and designation, threats, harassment, and intimidation. Next slide. And here are just a few examples of the human costs of counterinsurgency. On February 6, 2025, A spy plane piloted by a U.S. military service member and 3 defense contractors crashed in a rice field in Maguindanao del Sur, killing all 4 on board and a carabao belonging to a local farmer. The plane was performing an unspecified intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance mission in support of security cooperation activities. So what a U.S. spy plane is undertaking in a remote and rural province in Mindanao really demands an investigation. And on the right, it's shows an example of how since Marcos took office, thousands of people have been displaced due to aerial bombing campaigns that he claims are to root out armed resistance in the countryside by the NPA. However, these bombings never show restraint. Whole families and rural communities always bear the burden. As you can see in this picture, more than 15,000 people from Himamaylan city in Negros Island have been displaced due to these and forced into these evacuation centers. These bombings and forced displacements are part of a process called hamleting, or clearing an area of an allegedly rebel presence and concentrating a population in a certain area for tighter military control. This was also a tactic practiced by the US-backed South Vietnamese army in the early 1960s. So despite the purported goal to root out insurgents, even during the peace talks, there is a secondary objective. When communities are displaced from their land, space opens up for agribusiness, mining, and other industries to move in unopposed. Indigenous Lumad communities and activists have regularly been subject to these violences by the military, and this grants an opening to foreign mining companies to grab their land and exploit it. Next slide. Okay. Yeah, just a few more slides. So there are tons of environmental impacts of Balikatan. I'll just kind of go through a few really quickly. So yeah, bombings destroy ocean and land ecosystems. Troop movements, vehicle maneuvers, construction activities, and the sinking of naval ships. All of these lead to extreme habitat loss and fragmentation, endangering local wildlife. The use of heavy machinery, explosive ammunition, and other military equipment contributes to soil and water pollution by chemical contamination. In 2012, a private military contractor dumped toxic waste and chemicals from U.S. ships into Philippine waters in Subic. From one U.S. ship alone, some 4 million liters of sewage were collected and dumped in Philippine waters. In 2013, the U.S. minesweeper, the USS Guardian, ran aground in a protected marine area known as Tubataha Reef. And this you can see in this aerial photo on the left at the bottom. You can literally see the damage that this ship is causing to the coral reef as it thrashes around in the water. This area is a World Heritage Site, and a permit is needed in order to visit it. So what is the USS Guardian even doing there in the first place? The ship damaged more than 25,000 square feet of coral, and but because of pressure through the People's Movement, the US had to pay $2 million for damages. Next slide. Human impacts. So we've already spoken about the killings and threats to activists, but here we also wanted to highlight the social impacts of the US military and Balikatan on everyday people. Instead of providing peace and safety, the US military presence increases acts of violence against women and gender-based minorities. Studies have shown that military bases increase forced prostitution in the regions where they are based. On the top left is a picture of activists calling for an end to the Visiting Forces Agreement due to the brutal murder of a trans Filipina, Jennifer Laude, in 2014 by a US Marine named Justin Scott Pemberton. While he was initially imprisoned, the Visiting Forces Agreement enabled him to get special treatment, and he was subsequently pardoned and released by President Duterte. This case clearly shows the racist, sexist, and transphobic ideology of the US military in how they violated the rights not just of Jennifer Laude, but of her entire family and community. And there is also direct economic impact on the livelihoods of peasants and fisherfolk from the military presence in the war games, such as Balikatan. When military exercises are held in specific regions, whole towns are shut down. No sail zones are implemented in the coastal areas, which has a huge impact on the livelihoods of subsistence fisherfolk and their communities. And as you can imagine, shooting giant missiles into the ocean damages the ecosystem for the fish and the fisherfolk. Oops. Okay, so thank you for letting me share this knowledge with you about the history and present of the US military in the Philippines and the harm which it continues to inflict on the environment and the people. I really hope that it has underscored the urgent need for us to collectively resist the US imperialist project in all the many places it has encroached upon the world. I'm also very grateful for this opportunity to link our campaign work in New York to the RESIST NATO campaign here in Germany and Western Europe. Thank you so much again for inviting me to present.
Wow, thank you, Amy. No, it's okay. That was very thorough. Thank you for that really thorough look into the situation in the Philippines. And yeah, definitely underscores why certainly the Filipino community here in Europe is also really actively taking part in this important campaign to resist NATO and US-led war, as it has dire effects on the Filipino people. And this is linked to also what's happening here in Europe. So I will turn it over now to Oz to speak about NATO and militarization across Europe. Oz, take it away.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. Is it good? My voice? All right. Thank you very much. It was very informative. I mean, to hear NATO's presence in Pacific and also the Balikatan exercises. I mean, the US's biggest fleet is in the 7th Fleet, which covers the Pacific, and the second one is in the 6th Fleet, which is in Europe and in Africa, where we are gonna talk about. I'm gonna go to the next slide. Yes. We'll cover a little bit about NATO's brief history. I'm not going to go so much into detail because I know that everybody knows. But we are going to be brief, then we are going to talk about Europe a little bit. And of course, when we talk about Europe, also beyond Europe, because as you know, the Europe is the rapid deployment hub of NATO to the Middle East and North Africa. So when we talk about the NATO's activities in Europe, automatically we talk about colonialism and imperialism directly. And yes, North Atlantic Treaty Organization or North Atlantic Terror Organization, I prefer to say, is established in 1949. And according to the Lord Ismay, he was the first General Secretary of NATO to keep Russians out, Americans in, and Germans down. That was his quotation. And NATO proudly reminds us in some of their meetings this quotation. And in their website, they have a chapter for this quote. And the first members for the NATO was additional members when it enlarged was Turkey and Greece. And of course, that was for the stopping the Soviets to go to the warm water, because as you know, Turkey and Greece controls the Aegean corridor from Black Sea to the Mediterranean. And of course, with that enlargement, the NATO became neighbor of the USSR as well because of Turkey, because Turkey was next to Georgia and Georgia was part of the USSR. So that was a critical enlargement, and that's why it was the first enlargement. And at this moment, NATO has 32 members, which 30 of them at the moment are in Europe, and just 2 of them are in the North America, sorry, which are the US and the Canada. But of course, when we talk about NATO, it goes beyond this 32 members. Right now, according to the NATO, they maintain relations with more than 40 non-member countries and international organizations. And the way that they do that is with the cooperation and partnership programs, which in next slide, we'll have a bigger map showing some of the most important partnership initiatives, which are the Mediterranean Dialogue, Istanbul Cooperation Initiative, and Partnership for Peace. These are the 3 major programs of NATO. And as you can see, with these programs, it has the members in the North Africa, and also with the Mediterranean Dialogue, it has a genocidal entity, the terrorist Zionist entity of Israel in NATO's influence area. Also some other members as well. And also, other than these partnership programs, also countries like Colombia, Australia, Japan are part of this partner group of the NATO. We'll talk about this later as well. And as you know, I'm going to go fast these parts. The themes in the NATO's history is the protection of Western and US imperial interests, offensive against European left-wing forces through the operations like Gladio or counter-guerrilla units and the projects in the NATO countries. And of course, focus on the eastward expansion. In the beginning of this webinar, there was a video showing that how NATO expanded, and over there you can see that the aim of the NATO was to expand to the eastward. And again, what is the role of the US and what is happening globally at the moment, which we are talking right now about Europe, and it affects Europe very much. As you know, the NATO is the facade company owned by US. And as we said, it is crumbling. And the European countries, the minion governments of the US is in panic. And that's why in Europe, we are hearing right now about creating some alternative NATO in case that happens. So that affects us because that affects the people, oppressed nations. Also, that affects the people in the Europe who will have to pay literally the price of their governments increasing their military expenditure. And we are going to talk about the numbers in the next slides. I'm going a little bit fast because we have, again, little bit slides. So, because of these recent developments in Europe, the panic to make the European governments to create different programs, and of course the biggest one of that, where European Union leads this project, is Rearm Europe, Rearm Europe plan. Of course, the name later changed by the objection of the Italian and the French government because they found it so cute, and they changed it to Readiness 2030. So, what does this plan? This plan is basically a plan of 800 billion defense expenditure. This is a huge number, of course. A little bit talking about the numbers of the European Union, we can say I put some numbers over here. In 2005, the defense expenditure of the European Union countries were just 149 billion. I'm saying just because right now it's uncomparable to that number. And after 20 years, in 2024, it became more than double. And it is in 2024, it was 326 billion. So this rearm that shows that how big this Rearm Europe plan is going to affect us and other oppressed nations of the world. And a little bit another information: the defense investments in just 3 years doubled in the European Union countries. So what do they aim by that? As you know, with the Trump mentioning a lot, NATO wants the member states to allocate their 2% of their GDP to the defense and military expenditures. In 2023, for Europe, average was 1.3% of their GDP. And with this Rearm Europe plan, basically, they want to fulfill this. They are planning to increase 1.5% of the GDP in most of the countries, each countries who are low in the previous years. They were not investing in weapon or not investing, wasting their people's money on the weapon. And the other thing with this Rearm Europe plan, as you know, in Europe, there's an institution called European Investment Bank. This organization is usually helps the countries for their infrastructure projects and those kind of projects. And right now, because of the Rearm Europe plan, they changed the regulations in the European Investment Bank to allocate more money for the military. So that's mean that the European Investment Bank will right now fund the military projects, the weapon projects, more than infrastructure projects. And of course, there are other elements too in the Rearm Europe, like the incentives for army investments for the private sector and so on. And of course, who's going to pay for this? We are going to pay. They want us to pay for this. Because when we talk about these monies and the cutting, the countries' budgets and the European Investment Bank's budget, that's mean for us to pay more tax, and that's mean for us less healthcare, less education, and less social welfare. So it is basically right now it's starting to, of course, the NATO's imperialism was affecting and always affects the nations who are fighting for liberation and oppressed peoples. And right now, it is going to affect the European people's pocket as well, because they're going to pay more tax and get less things on return. This is also one of the main point of the Resist NATO campaign, main part of the points of unity, along with the supporting the national liberation organizations, which later we will talk about the points of unity of the Resist NATO campaign. And of course, when we talk about Europe, as we said, we are talking about the rapid deployment hub of US. So when we talk about the NATO's military presence in the world, the first one, of course, NATO's own presence, which mainly these locations of these military units and the centers are mainly based in Europe, such as the shape. The long name of the shape is the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, and it's based in Belgium. And the other institutions like the Allied Joint Forces Commands, there are many locations. Some of them are in the Netherlands, some of them are in Italy. These are the NATO's own presence in Europe. And of course, NATO uses the member countries' national presence in Europe and beyond as well, as the famous ones like in Germany, the Ramstein Air Base, or another famous one is the Incirlik base in Turkey. So when we talk about the NATO's militarization in Europe, these are mainly the NATO's its own presences, but there are other ways too. In the fourth, we divided this for four category. In the fourth category, there's a presence of NATO in the semi-colonial entities, and this happens through the European and American semi-colonies, the semi-colonies that are under control of the European and the US regime, such as we just heard one, the Philippines, with the Mutual Defense Treaty and some other treaties that was mentioned. Basically, the Philippines is like the semi-colony of the US, serving for the US's military and the spreading imperialist terror throughout the region. But US is not the only one. For instance, this year we are going to have the NATO summit in the Netherlands, the small country of Netherlands. Even Netherlands still has its military presence in the Caribbean, such as the countries like Curacao, St. Martin's, and still uses NATO also uses these presences. Or like Cyprus, right now I'm talking to you in a city called Nicosia. Half of it is occupied by a NATO power, Turkey. And around me, because it's a small island, we have 5 NATO countries basically using this small island in the Middle East to spread the imperialist terror. Right now, the Palestine, what is happening in Palestine and Yemen, it's directly related with the NATO bases and NATO presence in this tiny island nation, which is part of the European Union. Even geographically, it's not in Europe. So when we talk about the NATO's presence in Europe, it goes beyond. It goes beyond to all these semi-colonial entities. And of course, NATO keeps its presence in the non-NATO countries as well, through the partnership programs or through the conflicts that it created, such as in Balkans, or whatever happened in Yugoslavia after that. Right at this moment, NATO is present in the Kosovo. NATO has its headquarters in Bosnia. Other than that, in the Middle East, NATO is still present in Iraq, as we know, training the military forces over there. And with the Mediterranean dialogue, the Partnership for Peace, these kind of agreements, there are bases that NATO uses in Jordan, Qatar, Kuwait, and almost all these small Gulf countries. So this is when we talk about NATO right now, because it's trend, people think about mostly the Russia, the Cold War period, and etc. But NATO's history is just a history of attacking the peoples in the Middle East, Africa, Latin America with counter-guerrilla activities. And so we have to little bit turn our eyes other than the Russia threat in the quotation mark. And this is a map of that I was mentioning, the US's fleets, because the United States' biggest war machine are their fleets. And as you can see, as I mentioned, 7th Fleet is the biggest one, which covers the area of the Philippines. Philippines serves the 7th Fleet greatly. But the 6th Fleet, which covers Middle East, most of the Africa, Europe, is second most important and the biggest fleet of the US. And headquarters of this 6th Fleet, of course, in Europe. It's in Italy. And Italy hosts many other US and NATO presence as well, such as even AFRICOM, which is the, again, US's presence in the NATO's presence in Africa. The headquarters are in Italy. So when we talk about the Europe, as I mentioned, it is important to understand that when we talk about liberation of the Middle East and Africa from the NATO, the fight that we give in Europe is critical. And as a case study, also I would like to share with you the NATO's presence in Cyprus. As you can see, Cyprus is a small island, and right now we have 5 NATO militaries presence here. Half of the island is occupied by Turkey. 3% of the island is occupied by Britain, because Cyprus was a British colony until 1960, and we gave a heroic armed liberation struggle, a guerrilla struggle against Britain, and got our independence. But they didn't left. They kept this 3% until today. And in 1974, because of the Cyprus's anti-colonial activities and support for the anti-colonial world, NATO organized a Turkish occupation. It was a NATO-backed operation, and half of the island is occupied at the moment. And currently, France, US, UK, Turkey, and Greece has their military presence on the island. And recently, in the last years, these military presence are increasing with new so-called agreements with the US and the France. And every day they get more and more so-called right to use the bases in Cyprus. And as I mentioned, right now the terrible things, genocide happening in Palestine, and as many little people knows that this intelligence, signal intelligence towards Gaza is based on Cyprus. The planes bombing Yemen, Yemeni people who are trying to help their brothers in Palestine, those planes are flying from Cyprus, from the British bases. So again, the militarization, when we talk about NATO and the increase of militarization in Europe, it is very important for NATO because Europe is not, and the European countries are not the ones who control NATO. They like to think that, but they're just a hub for US for spreading its imperialist terror. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Oz, for that presentation and bringing the conversation home about US-led war and NATO here, and why it especially matters for us to also take part in resisting NATO here in Europe, also in the belly of the imperialist beast. I will turn it now to Tess from ALPAS Pilipinas, who will talk specifically about Germany's role and the increased militarization, which I think many of us here in the room and online are also fighting. So, Tess, to you.
Fantastic. Yes, I think I can just stay here,
Sure.
actually, because I'm already in the call.
Perfect, great.
So I can just use your mic and people can still see me, which is great, I think. So yeah, hi, I'm Tess. I'm from ALPAS Pilipinas. We're a Berlin-based collective, and yeah, we're activists with Filipino migrant background, second generation, as well as allies. And ALPAS fights for the rights and welfare of Filipinos in Germany, but also supports the people's struggles for genuine democracy in the Philippines. And since we're Berlin-based, our idea was to look at the role of Germany in all of this and the militarization that's going on over here. So what's happening? Let's move to the first slide. Yes, perfect. So Germany is ramping up its defense spending like it has never before. So in 2025, the government is debating a military budget of over 60 billion, which is a steep rise even from previous years. And this isn't just about more money, it's also a sign of a deeper shift and a political and structural reorientation of how Germany understands security. And we can already see that by the milestone that was back in 2022 when Germany created a 100 billion special fund, the Sondervermögen for the Bundeswehr, the German military. And this money was kept outside of the normal budget. So it wasn't subject to the debt brake at all. And in other words, this means while sectors like education or health or climate are still tightly restricted in funding, military spending was suddenly given a very fast track. And critics even included the Federal Audit Office. They warned also that the funds lacks transparency, like where does the spending go to specifically. And if we move to the next slide, I also brought some numbers to look at because now in 2025, most of that 100 billion has already been allocated. And in March, Germany took the next step. So the government decided that all defense spending above 1% of the GDP, about 44 billion, will be exempt from the debt brake. That means unlimited borrowing is now allowed for the military. So that's the decision as it is now. And at the same time, CDU, CSU, and SPD, like the German parties, proposed a 500 billion infrastructure fund. 100 billion of it is earmarked as climate protection, but the rest, 400 billion, is designated for broad infrastructure projects, meaning energy, education, transport, and also, as you can think of, defense. So officially, this is framed as a general investment plan. But politically, as I was going through the different sources and reading up, you can actually tell that it's designed to make Germany's defense spending to meet NATO's 2% target, to make that really more reliable, that it's going to be met. And several actors have also begun framing military infrastructure projects like, barracks or dual-use logistics as qualifying as infrastructure. So also, again, we do have some insurance communication about that. And critics warn that under this umbrella, military spending could gain priority, while, as we already have seen, climate, education, social investment, and all that is relevant for us remain dependent on slower project-based funding. And if we go to the next slide, we also do see that meanwhile, Germany is also expanding its military presence abroad. And this is also a very recent development. So in April this year, it officially established a permanent combat brigade in Lithuania near the Belarusian border. And it includes around 4,800 troops and over 200 civilian staff. And this is part of NATO's strategy to reinforce its eastern flank. And this is a pretty big deal because it's the very first long-term foreign military deployment since World War II. So for a country with Germany's historical legacy, this move is very symbolic. So the country is not just participating in NATO missions, but it's also taking the lead in militarizing Eastern Europe again. And this isn't just about defense, it's part of the NATO strategy to project power along the eastern flank. And it feeds directly into what these researchers would call a security dilemma, right? So one side arms up, the other responds, and as a result, it's a more unstable and dangerous region. So if we go to the next slide, what we also wanted to bring is that in parallel to these financial and strategic shifts, the idea of reinstating military conscription, so the Wehrpflicht, has re-entered public debate. So leading politicians, including our Defense Minister Boris Pistorius, have publicly expressed interest in exploring new models of compulsory service. And while no decision has been made yet, even the fact that this conversation is gaining traction marks a further normalization of military solutions in German domestic policy. So yeah, what does it mean? Let's move to the next slide. So the impacts of militarization aren't abstract, and they show up in public budgets, priorities, and inequalities, right? So if we look at the basic contradiction that we do see here, while billions flow into tanks, drones, and long-range missile systems, public services remain chronically underfunded. Schools still face teacher shortages and crumbling buildings. Rural hospitals are being closed or consolidated, and people have to travel long distances. Affordable housing projects stall due to lack of investment. These are just some of the examples that we do see and that we do see our society struggle with. And while it's difficult to prove that military spending directly causes these issues, the political contrast is quite stark. And the same government that says it can't afford to expand childcare or tackle homelessness finds billions for weapon industry projects. So at the same time, NATO's military expansion, led in part by Germany, does not address the root cause of conflict at all, right? So inequality, ecological collapse, and authoritarianism, these are not addressed. Instead, it hardens borders, fuels arms races, and limits diplomatic space. So the more NATO builds up its forces, the less space there is for diplomacy and peace building. And how is that done? It's done by spreading fear. That's used to justify the militarization. So fear of Russia attacking Europe as well, fear of terrorism, fear of China as well. And yeah, these narratives legitimize extraordinary spending and expanded powers. And yet, actually, they do not really offer real safety. And for many, especially migrants, activists, and working class communities, they mean more policing, more surveillance, and greater insecurity. But fear actually is selective, right? So is it really more likely currently that Russia will attack Berlin rather than the next flood or heat wave or harvest failure in Germany? So while the government pours billions into weapons, it fails to meet climate goals, meanwhile, underfunds disaster response, and neglects the services people rely on every day. So what we choose to fear and fund as well reveals also who holds power. And if we go to the next slide, if it's not us as people that are profiting, it's a fair question to ask who is likely profiting from these actions, right? And we brought some examples, the very first one being the weapon industry. For example, Rheinmetall is probably the most prominent one and also one of the biggest, but by far not the only one. We have quite several of these in Germany. But Rheinmetall is one of the largest arms company, and it's enjoying record profits currently. In 2024, it reported a 33% increase in revenue and nearly doubled its operating earnings. So it's building new factories and artillery shells, armored vehicles, and now even produces drones and satellite systems. And then we have also seen, for example, here right in Berlin-Wedding, that Rheinmetall is also converting former car parts factory into weapon production sites. Just yesterday, there was a demo right here in Wedding as well. Yeah. So this is framed as job protection, but actually a publicly funded rescue plan for an industry. Yeah, it's more like a rebranding, basically. Second industry that is likely profiting from all this is the German automotive industry. They have been facing economic pressure from the electronic vehicle transition, so that they were struggling, and global competition and falling demand. So they are increasingly seen as a potential resource for the arms industry. So Rheinmetall is already repurposing automotive plants as said, and beyond that, Rheinmetall CEO already suggested to Volkswagen that their factory in Osnabrück would be very, very suitable for defense manufacturing. So a proposal that hasn't been acted on, but signals a strategy of interest, no? And meanwhile, also major auto suppliers like Bosch or ZF or Schaeffler have been named in public debates and lobbying campaigns as possible partners for expanding arms production. And while none yet have committed to the idea of shifting automotive expertise and infrastructures towards military ends, it's gaining traction in both industrial and political circles. It's presented again as job protection, but it raises the question again, why not retool for green mobility or climate resilience instead? Why should the future of German industry be steered by weapons and production? Yes, and then third, we do also have the politicians logically. So this is also very likely that they profit. Why? Because especially on the center right, like the CDU, they're profiting like ideologically. So the militarization narratives allows them to appear like tough and distract from inequality and build national unity through fear and force. So like everything is under control. And the criticism is framed as naive or unpatriotic if there's some. So they benefit from the appearance of control while the real control shifts towards industry lobbies and the NATO. And while ordinary people are told to tighten their belts, the arms industry is booming. And all of this is happening under the banner of security. But real security probably does not come from weapons, but from affordable housing, dignified work, strong healthcare, and a planet we can survive on. So yeah, if we go to the next slide, just a short conclusion, what does this all mean? Germany isn't just reacting to security threats, it's actively reshaping itself into a militarized NATO state. Through major investments, international deployments, and cultural shift that normalizes preparation for war. And this shift has real consequences, right? It pulls resources away from social and ecological needs. It empowers corporate and political elites, and it spreads fear rather than building safety. And it raises the question, whose security is actually protected and at what cost? Germany's militarization is not inevitable. It's a political choice, and political choices can be contested and changed. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Tess, and thank you to all the speakers. We've just taken in a lot of information. So though we're running a bit behind on time, I do want to take like 2 minutes to have a short discussion for the folks in the room. Again, find a new partner. If you're so bold, I mean, you can talk to the same new person. And discuss some of these questions. What did you learn? How does it connect to your work here? And yeah, how can we expose NATO and combat the narrative that NATO is about peace? Yes, so we'll take, and then online, I invite you to also take a moment to consider what you've learned and to share in the chat some of your thoughts you have now. So
that's a great breakout group. Should we do it?
Yeah.
For them? We can do it online as well.
Yeah,
How many
okay.
people are there? Should we do 3 breakout rooms? You will be assigned automatically.
Yeah, you're
Push the button.
Okay, great. Yes. Okay. So online, you're gonna go into a breakout room. So
Talk
to each other. Great. Okay. Discuss.
It's about quote unquote winning the war. There's no peace in that kind of war. That's why they're having a forum on the Indo-Pacific. Last I checked, NATO stood for North Atlantic. It's nowhere near the Indo-Pacific. That's because NATO was not just about the North Atlantic. NATO is everywhere. NATO's not about peace. It's about counter-revolution. It's about attacking whoever it wants for this White House to still remain on top. So what does this mean for our peace movement? What was really great about our Resist NATO summit that we had last night is we talked about the movement for a just peace must connect with all of those who are waging a just struggle for their liberation. Because peace is about self-determination. Peace is about sovereignty. Peace is not just the absence of violence for a little bit of time. It is about creating a new system where we don't have to decide if we're going to pay for school or go to the doctor, or if we have to choose between paying rent or buying food today. So the kind of movement that we're building is one that gets us all together. And we are building this every single day. Just last weekend in San Diego, California, members of the Resist NATO Coalition were also involved in the International Cancel RIMPAC Coalition. We took over 500 people to the streets of San Diego against the US bases. And now we're here, hundreds in the street against the NATO summit. So this is the movement that we want to build with you. This is the movement that resists NATO, that no to NATO, yes to peace, and all the people need to unite behind.
Yes, that was our amazing comrade Cody
There, if we can.
sharing amazing speech. And yeah, this was from last year. And basically, this year we are gonna do the same in Netherlands. The NATO summit will be in The Hague, so-called City of Justice. And we are gonna say over there, no peace in the City of Justice. And it will be on the 24 and 25 June. We made a points of unity. The steering committee, beginning of the campaign, made a points of unity for the campaign. We could go one slide before to see the flyers. Yes, this is one of the flyers. You could find all the webinars, all the these kind of materials in our website, and I believe that it is shared in the chat few times. It is a simple one-page website that is everything is very, very accessible. And basically, we are gonna be there to fight against imperialism and support the self-determination and national liberation struggles all around the world. And that's why there is a 9 points of unity of the Resist NATO campaign. Any organization or any individual who believes in these 9 points can be part of simply going to the website and signing that form. And not only, of course, it's not only about endorsing or being part of. When you fill that form on the website, you also take part in the working committees, who's basically organizing this event. Right now, of course, since the campaign started in June, beginning of this year, these are the campaign phases that I will talk about. In the beginning of this year, the launching happened. It was 11th of June. And since then, the working committees are right now in progress. The Education and Information Committee, for example, organizes all the webinars and the printed materials and etc. Social Media and Communications Committee is active with the emails and the promoting the Resist NATO campaign. There is Protest Action Committee, Counter Summit Committee, Legal Support Committee, Fundraising Committee, and all the people who are part of these committees are the different organizations from all over the world, not only in Europe, and individuals. And it is not late to be part of the working committees because right now we are in the last month and there is lots of work to do and there will be lots of help you can give to those committees. If we go few slides back, we can talk about the points of unity. We can read. The points of unity basically united around the subjects we talked today about the NATO's expansion, about the Europe's rearming plan, which will affect the peoples of Europe and, of course, peoples generally in the region, Middle East and North Africa and all over the world. But the most important thing about the Resist NATO campaign that it openly supports the national liberation, resistance, and self-determination. Why I'm underlining this? Because, of course, there are different, at this moment, the anti-war movements all around the world. But we are living in a time that some organizations and some movements are hesitant to talk about national liberation. So, but we believe that this is the time to talk about biggest time for to talk about the national liberation, support the national liberation, and our points of unity also evolves around this. Just to mention few important points, all of them are important, but it's a little bit long. I don't want to take much of your time. I mean, in the point 3, for instance, the question that came about Ukraine, the situation in Ukraine. Over there, it says, we oppose US NATO strategy of security through wars and of counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, mass surveillance, and systemic attacks on the people's rights and freedoms, as well as their direct responsibility for intensifying inter-imperialist rivalry. That is what is happening basically right now in the world. The webinars, the program of the Counter Summit will touch these points. We can go to next page, next slide. Yes, for example, we talked about we can go to the previous one. We talked about the partnership programs and how NATO has more than 40 non-member countries and organizations. In the point 5, we mentioned we oppose NATO's collaboration with non-member states through partnership programs such as Mediterranean Dialogue, Partnership for Peace, Istanbul Cooperation Initiative, and other frameworks that include governments such as the Zionist government of Israel with records of systemic violence, human rights abuses, and genocide. We could go to next page and read one more point. Point 7, we support the right of the people and nations to self-determination and sovereignty, the exercise of their fundamental rights and freedoms, and their right to resistance against imperialist aggression. These points of unity, all of them are available in our website and with the all other information. You could check the more detailed information from there. If we go to the next slide, we will talk about the phases again. Okay, right now we are the campaign divided into 3 phases: preparatory phase, which is the phase that we are in; event program, which will be during the counter summit and mobilization action; and the post-event phase. So right now in preparatory phase, the working committees are in progress to do necessary actions for the counter summit and the mobilization. These are basically the arranging the logistics, making the program of the counter summit, making the necessary arrangement for the mobilizations, and etc. And the event program will be in the counter summit. There will be speakers and panels, workshops, and cultural events as well, cultural activities as well. And in the protest action in the 22nd of June and 24th of June, this is important because there will be one in 22nd of June before the counter summit. That will be with collaboration with other counter summits and organizations that will be happen in The Hague. But as Resist NATO, we are a campaign that we said that during the actual NATO summit, we have to be in the streets. So on the 24th of June, the Resist NATO will be on the streets as well. And after the counter summit, of course, there will be post-event phase where there will be evaluation of the campaign and deciding on the next steps. Because like last year's campaign, these campaigns shouldn't be only during these NATO summits, during one-time events. Right now, especially when this much terrible things happening, genocide, and imperialists are doing their crimes against humanity, we have to constantly fight and we have to be always united. So in the post-event phase, all the organization and individuals who were part of the campaign will come together and make a roadmap, basically, for the future steps. We could go to next slide. Yes, we talked about here too. There are basically the structure of the Resist NATO Europe. We mentioned the working committees. There is also steering committee that provides day-to-day leadership and oversight of the implementation of the campaign. And as we mentioned, there is a campaign members. Campaign members comprised of organization or individuals who agree with the points of unity and will participate in the campaign against NATO summit. These are the things we mentioned already. Again, right now, the Education and Information Committee is organizing few more webinars and events. Anybody who wants to sign to the Resist NATO campaign and who are interested to contribute to education and information, that will be great. Also, of course, right now, most important committees are the Counter Summit Committee and Protest Action Committee, since we entered to the last month. Any organization and individual who wants to be part of any committee are welcome. There's always a need for comrades in this struggle. Do we have next slide? Yes, these are another two leaflets that Resist NATO and its collaborating organizations made. The first one is the Save the Date flyer. This is available on our website. And the second one is the Resist NATO and another organization, Veto, from Netherlands, which is part of the Resist NATO campaign, made this poster and stickers. And this sticker is all around Netherlands right now, and poster is all around Netherlands right now. I love it. No peace in the city of justice with NATO in town. We fight back. Yes, in June next month, we will fight back. Do we have another slide? No. Okay, this is the question part. I'm leaving. I'm passing it to Mary. Thank you very much. And the link should be again in the chat, the link for the Resist NATO campaign.
Yes. Like I said, thank you so much, Oz, for an overview. Yes, if there are any questions about the campaign. Otherwise, we can also, yeah, any questions? Okay. Yes, this is, yes, gone a little bit longer than we planned. So thank you everybody for your patience, but I hope you also enjoyed the group discussion time, which is kind of what extended it. And thank you so much for listening. Like I said, so yeah, we've just been talking about what can we do about this? And yeah, just to reiterate, really, yeah, calls to action. We hope you'll get involved in the Resist NATO campaign and join us in mobilizing to The Hague. But also to underline what Enzo was sharing before, that the work will continue after the campaign as well. And we really, as ALPAS and ILPS Germany, want to build up this a strong internationalist movement here to connect with the movements that are really leading the fight against imperialism in the global south, in Palestine, in the Philippines, Kurdistan, etc. And yeah, ILPS links us directly to those struggles. So we hope that you'll join us in that as well. You can talk to me about Resist or about ILPS. And you can get in contact with us through all of these means. And yes, I want to just close. I'm sorry, speeding to a close. But I want to close with, yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Close with a short song, but it's from the Philippines that's about taking down imperialism. I thought it'd be a good way to end. Also, it's very important in the Filipino struggle to cultural work is very important. So I wanted to share that, and in particular, a chant also from the Philippines, which is about taking down imperialism. Anza, will you help? Oh, ALPAS members, will you help me? Okay, so it's Imperialismo y Baksak. And so we'll just practice it. So I say imperialismo, and then you all say ibaksak, so it means take down imperialism. Imperialismo!
Ibagsak!
Imperialismo!
Ibagsak!
Nice. Okay, so let's practice. Because we're gonna listen to the song, and then the song is gonna end, and then we'll do imperialismo, ibaksak, clap. You got it. We can do it. The clap, it's the unity clap, and we end all of our meetings to indicate, look, to celebrate what we've accomplished and to close in a united moment that we're taking down imperialism one step at a time. So hopefully this song will play. That is here, I hope. Imperialismo! Thank you, everybody. Oh gosh. Thanks, everybody online. Thank you, thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.